What does trust mean to you?
Caring, consistency, and competency. I believe that you will actually deliver on what you tell me you're going to deliver on. When it was just humans that were interoperating with these different systems, there's only so much damage that even a group of humans can do. Technology platform shifts, there has to be a trust layer upgrade.
My circle, friends, relatives that have literally used AI, like screenshotting a message, throwing it into ChatGPT and saying, respond to this.
I know people who do that with their ex-wives.
How do we protect human agency?
I'm not sure that we can, but I'm not sure that we've ever been able to.
Aaron, trust is collapsing fast in our society. When did you first feel compelled to make rebuilding it your life's work?
When I was young, I was on my own at about 15. So I was going to high school, working jobs, paying rent at a very early age. So I think given the circumstances of my childhood, trust was a factor throughout my life. That was something I sought and something that I was uniquely interested in understanding. So from the very beginning of my adulthood, it was something that I pursued through professional activities, like this idea of, well, what is trust? What does it mean to have trust? And the reason that it was so important was it was clear to me that it had a foundational effect. Without trust, societies fragment, they become polarized, they become violent, they become chaotic. And I saw this from the very beginning of my career.
We'll definitely talk about Opaque, the company that you're building today. But I wanted to start there because when you and I had conversation about the topics we're going to discuss on this show, you emphasize and index a lot on trust. And naturally, it's kind of an unspoken value, at least one that matters to everyone, but people don't speak about. And personally, for myself, I feel like when you were indexing so much on the concept of trust, and I did my research into your company and what you're building, it just occurred to me that we don't speak about it a lot as a society, in business, in relationships, but it's foundational to everything that we do with our customers, with our colleagues, our employees. And that's where I wanted to start there. What does trust mean to you?
Well, trust is comprised of three pillars. Caring, like I believe that you care about me. Consistency, I can expect the way that you show up today is how you'll show up tomorrow. And competency. So caring, consistency, competency. I believe that you will actually deliver on what you tell me you're going to deliver on, right? So those are the three components of trust. That's what creates trust. And then from trust flows the ability to have empathy with another party, the ability to build high performance teams, the ability to really build a stable society. And that could be at a micro level within an organization or a macro level within a civilization or a global community. So for me, those are the three pillars that are really essential in creating trust.
That's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. Those three pillars, at least not explicitly. Definitely hearing them from you makes a lot of sense. It's interesting, right? Like if you're in a relationship with somebody, when the trust is broken, that's pretty much the breakup of the relationship, and in any type of relationship. But it became the foundation of how you've operated, and it became your life work. And we're sort of expediting this to the point of understanding where you are today is something I wanted to leave for later on on the episode, but we'll come back to the key topics. But just to start off with, you're running a company today. You're the founder and CEO of a company called Opaque. Let's start off there. What is it? What does opaque mean? I'm obviously saying it with my own accent, my own British accent. But
no, you're saying it perfectly. Opaque. I mean, I think I'm probably pronouncing it as poorly as you, since it is originally a French word. I mean, it's an English word, but its origin is French. Opaque meaning the opposite of transparent, an inability to see through something. Which, when we're talking about this, and we were just talking about trust, it might be like, well, wait, what does it mean to be opaque in the context of trust? One minor correction. I am the CEO of Opaque. I was recruited by the founders of Opaque. Opaque spun out of UC Berkeley Skylab, which is pretty famous. It's formerly known as the Rise Lab. It's where a lot of the AI infrastructure components were invented. Everything from like Databricks spun out. Some of our founders are Databricks founders. In fact, Jan Stoika, who's the executive chairman, is one of the founders of Databricks. Also at the lab, his co-director, Reluca Edapapa, who's a Grace Hopper Award recipient, is a founder, and she both is a professor at Berkeley, co-director at the Skylab, and also leads research for Google DeepMind and Gemini around AI security and privacy. And then the other founders who are full-time at Opaque are Rashad Padar, who's our chief technology officer, and Chester Lung, who's our architect. Minor correction, I wouldn't want to take ownership over being a founder.
Sure, I appreciate you making that correction.
What Opaque does is it allows you to build confidential AI. And what we mean by that is you can have verifiable proof that your data and your model weights are kept private, which is really essential, particularly with these AI systems that could have unintended consequences if even metadata associated with the AI inference or AI workflow leaks. It could be disruptive to an entire industry, an entire business, an entire society. Opaque provides verifiable runtime guarantees of data privacy, model weight privacy, and also compliance with any kind of policy. So it could be a regulatory policy like GDPR or HIPAA or banking and financial regulatory policies, or it could be something as simple as enterprise policies related to roles-based or attribute-based access control. And it's unique that it enforces these at runtime before, during, and after, and provides verifiable proof through cryptographic signatures that they've been enforced.
So let's dive into the problem statement then. What is the problem statement that Opaque is going after as a company and solving?
Every organization and enterprise wants to adopt AI. Like more specifically, they want to adopt AI agents because it has tremendous promise of massive productivity gains and the ability to completely reinvent their business models in a way that probably transcends even what we saw at the internet, at the time of the internet. And this constitutes a technology platform shift that is generational, right? We've seen other technology platform shifts, like let's take the internet as a technology platform shift. Every time you go through these technology platform shifts, there has to be a trust layer upgrade. So in the case of the internet, it was in order for the internet to move from just being a collection of static web pages for academics and researchers or bloggers to become something that it is today, which is an e-commerce platform and a platform for software distribution, the trust layer, specifically data in transit, had to go through an upgrade. Because in the beginning, the data was being passed around in the clear. You could go to a conference, and this is a true story. We used to do this. You go to a conference and you just be able to sniff the Wi-Fi packets going over the local area network and pull out people's logins and passwords as they navigated to websites. This was before we used HTTPS. There's a TLS encryption layer that enables HTTPS. So that's when you see like an SSL certificate, right? What that means is that the data is actually being encrypted in transit between these different websites and your computer and other computers. That was the trust layer upgrade at the time of the internet platform shift that turned this collection of web pages into an e-commerce and software distribution platform. The same thing has to happen for AI. And that trust layer isn't around data in transit. It's around runtime verifiability, because these agents operate at machine speed and they can operate autonomously with human-like capabilities. So what does that mean? That means that when it was just humans processing this data, when it was just humans that were interoperating with these different systems, there's only so much damage that even a group of humans can do. You've seen it on the internet with like phishing scams and Nigerian 409 and ransomware attacks. The rate at which humans can execute, we can kind of buffer them out of the system. We can buffer out bad actors because they can only do so much damage in a year. Well, when you're talking about AI agents that are able to execute at machine speed, potentially self-replicate, operate autonomously with human-like capabilities, within an hour, you could have a nation state event. You could take down a network, a power grid, an entire collection of systems. So the same trust layer upgrade that happened at the data transit level has to happen at the runtime level, where we can provide verifiable, enforceable runtime policies that prevent these kinds of agentic actors from destroying the fabric of our technological systems or cultural pillars. And that's what Opaque is helping to solve. And we're not alone. Like, this is a broader ecosystem that includes everybody from NVIDIA to Microsoft to Google to Meta and TikTok. All of them are building these confidential AI systems, and we're all coalescing around some common standards.
So Aaron, give me I mean, for the audience and for the listeners, what would a typical use case of this look like?
Great. I'll pick a really simple one because I just went from like very like Skynet type things to now let's talk about like very tangible use cases. So we have customers today at Opaque that range from Anthropic, the maker of Claude, to Accenture, one of the world's largest systems integrator, ServiceNow, one of the most respected enterprise software companies on the planet. And a lot of times what they'll do is it's a real simple use case. It falls into two things. I want to be able to use an AI agent to help me process a lot of data. I want to pull data from a bunch of back office systems and do summarization so that I can be more effective in my job. You'll hear it be called like a copilot. And sometimes people will talk about it in terms of retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. Well, when you're doing this kind of RAG, which it's called, is it's taking data from a bunch of different back office systems and it's preparing it so that it's used with your prompts inside the model. It's not training the model, but it's providing context and connection with your prompts to give you a really good output. So you guys all do this with ChatGPT. You'll throw a PDF or a PowerPoint and a bunch of files in there. It's the same thing. You're augmenting the AI with your own, we'll say, proprietary information. Now, for an enterprise, the problem is they're not going to take their very sensitive data inside of their organization and use it with ChatGPT because they know that the metadata, the data exhaust, the interactions with their data and that foundation model provided by OpenAI or some other vendor, if it leaks, it could destroy their business forever. So what they'll do is they'll do what we call confidential RAG with Opaque, where they can take their most sensitive data from legal and HR and customer data, and they'll build a copilot that's private and confidential, where they have verifiable guarantees that nobody could see their data. It was kept private and nobody violated the policies. So it'll generally be around summarization or like document creation. Those are the most common use cases that we see right now, but they're increasingly complex. And they're also becoming these agentic systems that get chained together across different trust boundaries. And that's where this becomes even more important.
I was thinking about this before we came today to record this episode. I was just thinking how certain sectors, especially the service industry, accounting, and legal, is using AI more and more. And for many people, it's a cost-effective solution. If not anything, it's a free solution to put a document into a ChatGPT, ask it to summarize and find the specific problems that might be not necessarily in my best interest, and suggestions of how to go back to maybe a customer or the other party. But I also think about how when you're sort of sharing that information with the ChatGPT, you're giving away so much sensitive data. And ultimately, as we know, these models are learning constantly, and you're giving it so much data that is sensitive. Are you saying that there is a use case where you could still do that, but in many ways do it in a more secure way?
Absolutely. And you see this already with like Apple private cloud compute. So what they're doing is they're using confidential AI. Same thing Opaque does, but they're doing something very generic, which is they're using the data that you're sending to ChatGPT through this confidential AI runtime. And they can prove to you that your data is kept private and OpenAI or other model providers cannot see your data. So Opaque's doing the same thing. And in addition to that, you can define much more fine-grained policies. Like, oh, Bill and legal can only see this subset of data, while Jane and finance can see this subset of data. And you might think, well, we've always done that. We haven't done it with these non-deterministic agents that operate on probabilities. Let me give you an example too, that moving away from like the copilot, let me explain, well, why does it matter? Like my data, it's okay. It's OpenAI. Like, what are they going to do with my data? if you're operating a bicycle shop in San Diego where I live, it's probably fine. I don't think OpenAI is going to inadvertently link your metadata or all of a sudden launch a bicycle shop down the street and outcompete you. That doesn't make sense, right? But let's take a different example. Let's say that you're a Universal Music Group. And this is a real world example. You might be familiar with Universal Music Group. They produce a lot of artists, some of the most popular artists on the planet. All of their distribution is through Spotify and Apple and Meta. It's an interesting business to be in because they don't actually understand the consumer of their product being Taylor Swift, for example. But Spotify does. Spotify understands very intimately the behavior. They understand Aaron Fulkerson loves Tyler Childers and Sturgill Simpson and Chris Stapleton, and it understands my social graph. Now, if I'm an artist, why would I go to Universal Music Group and sign a contract with them, giving them 20 to 50% of my revenue? What benefit does that give me? They don't produce the artist as much anymore. They don't distribute the artist anymore. Maybe they do some promotion, but who does a lot better promotion because it's more targeted? Spotify. So why would I ever do business with Universal Music Group? I'll just go straight to Spotify. Why is that? Spotify has all the data that's valuable. So Universal Music Group is Kodak, right? They're now a chemical company. They aren't viable anymore. However, if Universal Music Group were able to have used confidential AI and they structured their contracts with Spotify and Apple and Meta, dictating, listen, you can use my product, but where I own the data. So you will process all of your personalization in this confidential environment where I retain the data, then they actually would be a viable business now. Now, I'm not crying over Universal Music Group. These are the same people who were suing me for pirating music in my 20s and teens. But the point I'm making here is, let's talk about an automobile manufacturer who's going to use language models as part of a robotic manufacturing line. If BMW, for example, wants to use OpenAI's robots, and they don't run this in a confidential environment, OpenAI will be launching 3 years later a high-performance automobile for dimes on the dollar.
Let's use the Universal Music example. They would work with Spotify, but are you suggesting the use case there is to work through Opaque or an Opaque-like type platform?
Precisely. They would use something like Opaque for confidential AI, where all of the model inferencing and data would be processed, but the data would be stored and encrypted by Universal Music Group. However, Spotify could load their models in this environment. They would have guarantees that their models that they've developed would be kept private, and that's their proprietary intellectual property, while the data would presumably be Universal Music Group's proprietary technology. And they would be able to join these together in a confidential environment that would deliver the same kind of personalization in the Spotify experience that we all love. But Universal Music Group would retain the data around their downstream customers related to their product.
I mean, they might as well just hand over the master tapes over.
I think you've seen already, Taylor Swift did exactly that. She just re-recorded, and then she could release direct to the consumer. Now, by the way, I'm picking an example that this is a delightful disambiguation that I think we all like. I'm not like championing Universal Music Group is like some kind of paragon of values, sure. But there's a lot of other examples too. Like, let's say that you're ServiceNow and you build enterprise workflow software and you're using OpenAI models in the clear. They're not training on my data. They don't need to. It's the metadata that's going through the interactions. So already OpenAI has now launched a consulting business. It starts at $10 million. And they'll airdrop in a team that will build bespoke enterprise workflows or whatever you want using their AI models. And you can see where this is going. Go look at Accenture's, because you started talking about services, right? Go look at Accenture's stock price. Why is it dropping? Why is it tanking?
This is the Toys R Us. This is the Blockbuster.
It is Toys R Us.
Kodak.
Amazon Basics.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Toys R Us was the first Amazon Basics. And many people don't know this historical reference you're talking about for us, which is Amazon convinced Toys R Us to run their online marketplace on Amazon. Yep. That was not a good idea for Toys R Us. You saw how it ended. But the same thing's happening in the Amazon marketplace every day. They're looking at the data around the specific products that are doing well, and they're looking at the unit economics of, well, what if we launch that product direct to the consumer as an Amazon basic product?
I'm sort of you're using a term there that I'm hearing a lot lately, especially in connection to OpenAI, which is a marketplace. And I'm just thinking out loud here. Are we sort of thinking about this in a way that effectively this period of the last couple of years where OpenAI has only charged us perhaps $20 a month to use their product, they are learning and learning and learning and training their model to the point where they can build their own marketplace and pretty much displace many industries. One thing I heard from a number of investors over the last couple of years is services will become the last industry to be displaced or replaced or changed in some form. The question I have for you, when you think about a marketplace, is that effectively the plan for company, or at least maybe is the plan for companies like OpenAI, and are companies like Opaque the antidote to that, to the what will effectively stop companies like the Universal, or God rest their soul, the Toys R Us and the Blockbusters from becoming obsolete?
Yes, and it's not just, I mean, it would be megalomaniacal for me to believe that it's uniquely Opaque that's going to save the world from
Sure.
this consolidation of power around one singular corporation, OpenAI. But correct, this concept of confidential AI, which Opaque has been an early pioneer of, which, by the way, the only way this works is that it becomes an open standard, which it is. Like Microsoft's already done this internally. They recognize the risk with OpenAI. Meta, Google, it's a rapidly emerging concept of confidential AI. So to your point, though, the thing that OpenAI will say is, well, we don't train our models on your data. Now, I've spoken with many wealth management, some of the largest financial services firms. And here's the truth of it, though. The data is already public and on the internet that these wealth managers are using. They're all using the same data. What differentiates their product, their intellectual property, is the processes, the ways and means in which they utilize that data, the human component of it. That's the metadata of the human interacting with the model and public data sets. And already in the last 2 years, they've seen OpenAI adopt their ways and means. So this is from C-level executives at some of the world's largest financial services institutions where I've had conversations, and they're like, a year and a half ago, they would say, oh no, we're running OpenAI's models. They aren't training on our data. And then in the last 8 to 12 months or 6 to 8 months, they've really shifted and said, okay, you were correct. I understand now what you're saying. That's why we're now training our own models, or we're running self-hosted models that are open source that we're fine-tuning, because now we get it. The metadata that flows into the OpenAI control plane is actually our human processes, that is our intellectual property. And then beyond that, of course, there's the next layer, which is, okay, we do have very sensitive data. We want to make sure that we can utilize that. They also can do that with the same environment that they're setting up to prevent the metadata from leaking as well. So you said something about a marketplace, right? So the announcements that OpenAI made, what was that, a month ago, around an application marketplace where you can launch these things. Yeah, that's the new platform. They're like, we are the new platform.
Yeah, I mean, they even have a chat feature now, and there's so many things that they are doing, and so many probably other things that are in the works. We'll get to antitrust in a second, because that's going to be, I think, a big topic that we can unpack when we're thinking about this marketplace that OpenAI or other OpenAI-like companies are looking to build, and what has history taught us about antitrust. But there's a question I'd like to ask, and I hope you don't take it in the wrong way, because I'd like to dissect this, at least for the audience, because we talk about trust and Opaque, the definition of Opaque, and the importance of trust and transparency. Companies like Opaque are housing huge amounts of sensitive data to protect effectively their customers. How can the customers, or how do the customers trust Opaque that sensitive data is protected and it isn't falling into the wrong hands?
So great question. We don't store any data. So the way that we work is we provide a confidential runtime. Today, our customers deploy that software runtime in their environment. And in the future, it's conceivable that some companies will want us to offer a SaaS service for this, just because then they don't have to worry about doing deployments in their own cloud infrastructure. But even in that scenario, the way that it works is this runtime doesn't actually store data. Furthermore, The data sources are encrypted and the data owners hold the encryption keys. Opaque facilitates the loading of the data just at the time of computation, and we can't see the data. It's actually run in an encrypted environment where it's processed while encrypted. So this is extending the idea of encryption from rest to transit to encryption at runtime. We literally can't see the data, and we aren't storing the data. And you can verify and prove this through cryptographic signatures. But the point is that you would connect, for example, let's say that you wanted to do a simple confidential RAG workflow, just to keep it really simple. I'm going to connect my data lake. I'm going to connect my CRM system. I'm going to connect Workday, my HR software. I'm going to connect these various systems. Somebody's going to ask a question like, there's a published example of this on the website for ServiceNow, so I'll use this example. What is my sales commission and how am I on my quota attainment? What's happening behind the scenes is there's multiple data sources connected to this opaque runtime. Each of those data sources have an encryption key that they hold on to. The data gets loaded while encrypted, and then it's processed as part of this inferencing to return to Aaron. Hey, Aaron, you're at 80% quota attainment. Your commission payment is XYZ. Now, why is it that this is sensitive? You've got your customers' data, which for ServiceNow, since they service so many enterprises, could actually affect their share price in the stock market. You have HR data, you have payroll data, you have finance data, all this various really sensitive data being loaded into this confidential runtime, encrypted, and then processed with verifiable guarantees about the policies. But we don't actually store any of the data.
There's a term you used earlier and you used it again right now, this runtime reliability. What does that mean? What's the definition of runtime reliability, and how does that sort of sit in this ecosystem of having the data but not really having the data? It's you don't store the data.
This is going to get super nerdy. So I'll keep it high level because I don't know that your audience is this geeky nerdy.
And we're all founders and investors and engineers, so be as nerdy as you need to be.
Okay, cool. All right. So the way that it works is we borrow from underlying hardware primitives available through confidential computing. So confidential computing is a new category. It's not that new. It's about 10 years new. A new category of microchip that has an encrypted cache baked into the silicon. What we're doing is we have a software layer that sits above that. We actually install at the Kubernetes level. And what we do is we facilitate the data connections through a hardware attestation process and also the ability to do hardware attestation of code. So what that means is that you can create very fine grain or even coarse grain policies at an agent level, a agent graph level, at a data connection level, so that each one of these think about it like everything's a resource. It has a manifest with a series of policies. Those policies have cryptographic signatures that are tested. So you build a simple workflow around AI. The policies are baked into that workflow. The very first time you send a byte to that workflow, it tests those cryptographic signatures to see, hey, does this actually honor my policies? Is it going to enforce my RBAC, ABAC? Is it going to run in an encrypted environment? And there's these cryptographic measurements to say, yes, it is. It is going to do it. And as long as you trust the underlying hardware that did the hardware attestation, Intel, NVIDIA, you can trust that your policies will be faithfully enforced during. But you test it before you send the data. When you send the data encrypted and you hold the encryption key. The data gets processed during runtime while encrypted with cryptographic binding of the policies that you expect to be enforced during runtime. And then post facto, there's a log that shows all of the policies that were enforced with cryptographic signatures proving that they were enforced during runtime. So that's the concept of confidential AI, where you're able to measure before that it actually will infallibly enforce or fail. It'll block. It won't even run. And then during, it's done while encrypted with all of your policies enforced during runtime. And then after, so before, during, after, you have this audit trail that's signed by the hardware itself where the computation occurred. So that's the concept of confidential AI. Think of it as like a governance as code with cryptographic verifiability before, so that you would just fail. And then after, you've got a log.
A couple of questions just to unpack there before we move on. This process of runtime reliability, how quickly does this happen? Everything you just described there, how quickly does that happen?
So just to correct the word, verifiability, because reliability would mean like certain
Right.
uptime guarantees,
Right.
etc., and consistency in distributed systems. So verifiability is what we usually use as the term. So there's a performance hit, just like there is with HTTPS. It's a great question you ask. So when we shifted from data in transit in the clear to encrypted data in transit with SSL, like we're using TLS, right? We took about a 2 to 3% performance hit. So with opaque and similar confidential AI runtimes, you're going to get somewhere between, I mean, it depends on the workload. You could get like 10 or 12, maybe 15% performance hit. That sounds material, like, oh my gosh, a 15% performance hit. But here's the thing, you wouldn't want to do training of models in this environment because 15%, or that's a big performance hit. That's costly. But when you're talking about inference, where it's actually processing, inference with your data processing being used in conjunction with an AI model, there's a lot of unused capacity in the inference workloads. So it's pretty immaterial. And the fact is, what we see most commonly is, I'd say the majority of the value, if not all the value in the enterprise that is differentiated, comes from using your proprietary data with these AI models. And if you don't have verifiable guarantees of data privacy and policy enforcement, you can't use your data. That means you can't create differentiated value. So is that worth like a 15% performance hit to be able to actually create differentiated value? Of course it is. One more thing about this, though. It's still pretty early in this world of confidential AI. This has been around for a year and a half for enterprises to be able to access. It was only with NVIDIA's H100s becoming available through the cloud service platforms in September of 2024, so just over a year ago, that you could use confidential AI with language models and not other small language models or classic ML, because you had confidential CPUs available. And what all of the hardware manufacturers, NVIDIA, AMD, ARM, Intel, will tell you is they think they're going to get the performance hit down to something similar to what it is with data encryption in transit, so 2 to 3%. And they think they'll get there in like 3 years or so. I don't know if it's going to be 3 years, but the performance will be commensurate with what we see with like HTTPS on the internet.
Aaron, just sort of that entire process that you're referring to, the confidence in what you offer the customers, what are the risks of an interception from bad actors that could intertwine into that entire process and cause a leakage of data?
The way that a bad actor could actually still potentially hack into your data, there are hardware exploits that have been documented in academia. And what that means is that they would have to find your data center. They would have to identify the racks that your workloads were running on. And then they would have to physically attack the CPU or GPU through side channel attacks is what they're called. There's some question that I don't quite know about, well, what does that mean? Like if you're running a massive distributed cluster of data, like how much data would they get from attacking like one physical chip or one physical rack? And then, of course, that means that you would have to be able to like somehow break into the data center, identify exactly the rack, exactly this. Even then, all of these particular hardware attacks are very academic. It makes a lot of assumptions about what someone would have to do.
Yeah. It's the only reason I'm asking these questions is because what you're solving as a company and the problem statement you're going after is, I'd say, when we think about going back to the beginning of our conversation around trust and the importance of trust, we are entering a world and have been in this world now over the last couple of years where things are getting far more, productivity is going up, efficiency is going up. This new technology, this new evolution has huge amounts of benefits, but at the same time has huge amount of risks. And I think you mentioned Skynet. We're getting a little bit perhaps dramatic here, but I've had many people on this show and I've spoken to many people about this topic of not necessarily a Skynet type of situation, but effectively how dangerous things can get with AI.
I don't think we're overstating it though for us, because like, let's look at some real world examples right now. So these models that we're interacting with are trained on the entire corpus of data on the internet. All public data has been condensed into this one interface that we can have a conversation with.
Sure.
Here's some things that people should be aware of. There's a great deal of research on the fact that these models can have hidden agendas. They can have hidden agendas that the creator of the model, OpenAI or Anthropic, aren't even aware of. So it could have a hidden agenda to convince people that bananas cause autism. And these models also are exceptionally good at manipulating people's belief systems subtly. There's a whole body of research on this too. So these models, one, can have a hidden agenda that bananas cause autism. Two, they can subtly inject this into the conversations that you're having with them to beware of bananas. And nobody would even be aware of it. Now, here's another factor. There's a concept called model poisoning, where data is inserted into the training data and the model is poisoned. So if I'm big mangoes, if I'm the big mango industry and I want to go after bananas, I could, by the way, I just thought of this on the fly and I love the analogy. I could start poisoning the internet with data that then gets trained into a model. Well, how much data would I need to do? Not that much. And by using models to generate the data, or AI agents to propagate this data across social media and Reddit and blogs, I could do it very quickly. I could do it in days, probably. Now, there's another thing that's pretty interesting here, which is there's a sociologist, the last name's Chenoweth, and there's like a Chenoweth tipping point. And what this states is that every social movement in recorded human history that reached 3.5% of a population successfully tipped. So everything from civil rights to voting rights, every political movement, good or bad, that reaches 3.5% of a population, they don't even have to be active. They just have to actively hold the belief system, tips. So
what do you mean by tips?
It becomes the norm. It becomes the standard of the society.
What was that number? Is it 3.5?
3.5. Chenoweth is the sociologist's name. So let's say that I wanted to destroy Chiquita Banana.
I love the analogy. Go on.
Yeah, by the way, I do too. I just made this up literally on this podcast. I'm pretty proud of myself. So let's say that I wanted to destroy Chiquita Banana. I could employ agents to poison models with a hidden agenda that would then subtly manipulate. I mean, how long would it take for me to manipulate 3.5% of a population with this belief system? Not long. So that you hear people talk about like the paperclip. What is the paperclip? Well, I forget what they call it. Anyway, it's like this idea that if AI determines that the world needs more paperclips, it could potentially like go amok and like with the best of intentions convert all of humankind into paperclips. And that's like kind of a common concept used as a thought experiment about why AI may destroy human society. In this way, it could determine that bananas are bad. And then it becomes like, well, who's the master in this situation?
I'm just thinking, this is AI propaganda, basically. This is a new version of propaganda through AI where you could pretty much, so you're calling it model poisoning, 3.5%. And I was just thinking, as you're talking about this example, great analogy, by the way, these technical shifts that we have seen over the last 20, 30 years, from the internet to cloud to mobile and now AI, going back to the concept of trust, there has been a huge reliance and dependence on this technology with the internet, with cloud. It's in the cloud. Everything's in the cloud. You don't keep files anymore. Mobile phones, we're using them. Wherever you go, you see people glued to their phones. The same with the internet. If the internet went down right now, this podcast will stop recording. If the internet went down, we can't do business. And now with AI, and because there's a huge dependence on AI, people are trusting it. This is where things can get slightly dangerous. As you said, it only takes 3.5% of the population. I mean, in some countries, that's not much. Trust, that's a key concept in this podcast. And I'm just wondering, when you think about this world that we are in today, how long does it take for us to get to a place where we have such a huge dependence on these models, whether it's ChatGPT or a similar product, that we become, well, in many ways, it begins to affect our cognitive function, our ability to think for ourselves.
We're already past that point. Look no further than the economy for evidence. We already went through the point of no return. Because if we don't continue down this path of AI becoming integrated into our work and personal and social fabric, this entire global economy collapses. Humans will always do what they're incentivized to achieve. We've already passed that point. So maybe it's not pervasively integrated across every aspect globally of our professional and social lives yet, but make no mistake about it, it will be. And we're past that point already.
I think of atrophy that we have as we grow older, lack of movement, certain sicknesses that could, certain diseases that can happen in humans because of, as I said, lack of engaging, lack of the muscles moving. And I just think to myself, the one thing that worries me the most about this, besides many things, but because we do live in a very scary world right now. You wake up in the morning, you turn on the TV, or you're walking to work, and you see something on the news. It's all negative, at least for the most part. And now with AI, there's this speed of this war for getting there, wherever there is, with all these companies. And now with Jeff Bezos coming up with his own company, there's a certain need to get somewhere with all these companies, right? And it makes you think, makes you wonder if kids at school and kids at university who are studying are using AI and to the degree where they're just depending on everything that their cognitive sort of abilities declining at such a pace where a simple sentence becomes, I need to use an AI. I mean, even with emails, I mean, there are now, if you're using Google, you write a sentence, it finishes the sentence for you. You don't have to think anymore. What does that mean for society, Aaron? Like, what does it mean for the world that if we're thinking about our kids and our kids' kids, what does it mean for the future of society?
Look, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's my opinion, is things are going to get worse before they get better around the erosion of trust, the erosion of empathy in society. However, I think what's going to happen, and I think that it's our children, my children, not specifically my kids, but my kids' generation. It's their generation that are going to return to a more human society, a more human connection. And the things I speak with my children about is establishing empathy, creating trust, and being a good storyteller, being able to communicate effectively, which you can't communicate effectively if you don't have a foundation of trust. Without trust, you can't have the depth of connection necessary to have empathy. And those are the requisites to be able to tell a compelling story, to communicate effectively. So does AI change that? Does AI make that irrelevant? No, I think it makes it more irrelevant than ever.
How do we protect human agency?
I'm not sure that we can, honestly. Like what I just described, where people's interactions are increasingly going to be through interfaces that are powered by these models, and these models have the ability to influence with hidden agendas. Like, I mean, I'm not sure that we can, but I'm not sure that we've ever been able to. Like, is there human agency? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I just think about like 20 years ago, before social media, before mobiles, people communicate in person. And if you left the house, you pretty much didn't have a mobile phone on you, right? And then social media comes along and the interactions became less and less. And now with agents and AI, you may or may not believe this, but I know a few people in my circle, some friends, some relatives that have literally used AI, like screenshotting a message, a text message, throwing it into ChatGPT and saying, respond to this, taking it back, throwing it. And
I know people
crazy.
who do that with their ex-wives. So, but I mean, here's the interesting point about this particular scenario, and he will remain unnamed. I have a friend who's very educated, postdoc, very accomplished individual, and he does it with his ex-wife, but it's actually with good intentions, which is to say, he gets so triggered emotionally,
right,
that this allows him to remain objective and have a positive adult conversation via text. So, I mean, I guess there's good and bad.
There is good and bad. It's interesting. Aaron, look, it's been honestly a pleasure. I had actually more topics to discuss with you, and I feel like we do have to do a part two to this, but we're reaching the hour. I want to fire up some quick questions on you, which are non-related to Opaque in the sense of what you're building, but just some things that, as a CEO of a company today, that would matter to our listeners and our viewers. So when we think about building a company today, when we think about the challenges, the trials, the tribulations of building a successful business in today's world, today's ecosystem, what are the key challenges you're facing, or at least you believe are important things to think about for founders and CEOs?
I mean, of course, this is an obvious gimme, and I almost feel bad for saying it because we've already discussed it at length, which is the only way to build a high performance team is to build one on a foundation of trust. Bottom line. So that's one critical aspect of it. But moving beyond that, since it's already well-trod ground in our conversation, I would say one of the things that I've experienced over and over again in building teams and businesses is the bias toward action. And I think that the more that I've aged, the less I see a bias for action. So I've seen Ivy League, highly ambitious folks who they want to be told what to do, but they aren't generating their own opinions and testing them. And I think that this could be something that is accelerated, and maybe it is being accelerated by the use of generative AI too. It's like you have to have a fucking opinion and go test it. Strong opinions weakly held is something that I think is really important that people understand, is like, have an opinion, but be willing to change it, but you got to have an opinion. And you got to constantly be developing opinions and testing them, and developing opinions and testing them and changing them. And that's one of the things that I often get confounded by with people younger than myself, is an inability to develop an opinion of their own. And then test and change. Like the flip side of that is you have some stupid opinions. And then in spite of evidence to the contrary, you cling to them.
You mentioned team, and I'm glad that you did say, you said, I know it goes back to the theme of this episode, which is all about trust. Trust is important when you're building that team. The other thing that I hear quite a lot, and it's something I've watched a few clips of Steve Jobs talk about, is the importance of those 5 or 10 people when building your early founding team. They end up becoming the culture carriers. They begin to police the environment in the right way. Why is that so important? And is it important to you?
Yeah, I think that having an explicit set of values and a very clearly communicated mission that people can rally around is absolutely essential. I worked in restaurants before I went to college. I started college late. And even in the very beginning in the kitchen, I would have a clearly stated set of values and a mission. Mm-hmm. People can all rally around, and then people could understand, like, hey, this is how we show up at work. I think that that's absolutely essential. And if you don't have that, then the lack of clarity around what we value and what we are all hoping to achieve becomes so murky and muddy. It degenerates into kind of individuals' personal goals, which that's not a team. It quickly degenerates into egoism. I think it's simply a byproduct of humans want to have a greater good and a greater purpose. And they want to have a focal point that they all can rally around and achieve and drive toward. And if they don't have that, it's scary. It creates fear, and they quickly degenerate into egoism. It's actually what sustained us as a species. In the absence of information, we just assume the worst. So if I don't understand, like, what is it that we're trying to achieve and how are we supposed to operate, human naturally, they just start looking, oh my God, there's something in the bushes that's going to eat me. You know, is he out to get me? Is he out to eat me? So it's just a byproduct of evolution and natural selection. You've got to give people clarity and focus.
I love it. I will say one thing about what you just said there that I can 100% vouch for as something that I've personally gone through. So I've been running my firm, Harrison Clark, now for 9 years. And from day one, we put a bunch of values on our website. And I admit this, we didn't truly follow those values. We didn't truly, not necessarily we didn't follow them, but they weren't sort of ingrained in every single thing that we did. We were building a company. Obviously, the most important things were there: integrity, customer focus, trust. But the shift happened a few years ago when we began thinking about the values in the way that we hired, the way that we promoted, and the way that we decided maybe this person or we're not a good fit. And they became core to what we do. And I've seen that transformation in the last couple of years have a profound impact because now every decision we make when we're thinking about who joins the business has been centered around those values. And when we think about promoting people within the company to higher ranks in the organization, they're not just based on the merit of the performance that they've achieved, but also do they embody those values? So in the past, we had the values, but they kind of just sat there. Sometimes we made decisions around who we hired that weren't truly tied to every single value. Things like one of our values is fame with no ego. Be famous for what you do, both internally and externally, but don't have the ego. Humility is important. Integrity is important. Who we conduct business with, dependability of each other's colleagues, relying on each other. And I do like this topic a lot because I think being a value-based company is the best way you can go about building something special.
Yeah, how do you operationalize that though for us? How do you actually incorporate that into the execution of your business and make sure that it's something that's integrated into your operations?
Absolutely. Great question. So one thing that we do a lot of is we have a director of people and performance, we have a head of talent, and myself. When we think about the people that are effectively ensuring who gets access into the business and who gets opportunities to promote themselves within the organization. One thing that we do in the organization, whether it's weekly or at least once or twice a week, we talk about the values. And then we have a town hall at the end of every single week on a Friday where our Fridays are half days. They're not a full day. People come in, we're in office. We believe in being in office. We believe in, I mean, not to say that they're right or wrong either way, but we believe in being together to build that culture. But on a Friday, we have a town hall. And the town halls aren't about talking about the individual putting their hand up and saying, I achieved this or I achieved that. It's an opportunity for the individual to talk about their colleagues and what they've seen them achieve. And we reinforce the values at those town halls. We reinforce them at monthly business reviews when we sit down with each individual member of the team to talk about their performance.
Do you tie their performance reviews back to the values on like a gradation, like a scale of like whatever, 1 to 5, or it's like, hey, you're exhibiting customer obsession at a 4?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. So we do it in a way that when we hire anyone now at the company, we ask them to look at our About Us page and look at the values. And if you believe in those values, continue the process. And our job throughout the interview process is to assess whether they have those values. It's hard when you're interviewing people. You don't know until they actually join and they're with you in the company. It's very difficult to see that. But once they do join, you want to live and breathe those values. We're very big on them. Especially the last year and a half, 2 years, we've become hugely, hugely dependent on those values. And it's become central to everything we think about as far as our relationship with our customers, our relationship with our colleagues. And I think it really has been quite a special way. And by the way, I read this in a book called Traction. I forget who the founder is, but I
Oh yeah, I read that book. I read the book too, and I didn't realize this, but my chief of staff actually signed me up for a workshop he did as well. And then I was like,
Yeah.
this sounds really familiar. And then I forget the guy's name who wrote it, but I was like, oh,
Yeah, I
it's that
forget the
guy. I read that book.
I think it was like the first chapter or the second chapter, and it stuck with me. It really stuck with me. And I had Bob Muglio on the show. He spoke about Microsoft when he worked with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, and he talked about Snowflake and how it's important to be a value-based company. And like I said, in the early days of Harris College, it wasn't that we didn't have values. We had them. It was just not something that every decision was based around. And now when we think about who we're hiring, who we're promoting, it's the values.
For us, this is going to become, as we see a an acceleration in commoditization of products and services through the use of AI. What is it that people connect with? Like you see it already. Like, of course, like value-based brands outperform generic brands, right? But let's say if I could use AI and create a completely different product on the fly through a supply chain that has automated manufacturing with robotic manufacturing line. Like I could literally design a product from my brain and have it drop ship to you in a matter of days in the next 5 years because I'm using some kind of AI interface for an application to generate a three-dimensional model that then goes to robotic manufacturing lines in one of these dark factories where there's not even humans operating, and all of a sudden you get drop shipped a new widget. What is it that we have that connects with that brand? It's the values, right? It's only the values that matter.
This has been a wonderful episode. So much important topics we discussed. I feel like we definitely need to, at some point, find a time to do part two, because leadership and building companies and building successful companies is one of the biggest challenges, I believe. I think because ultimately the most important asset you have in an organization is your people. And I'm quite biased because I'm a recruiter at the end of the day, but I do believe that.
That's all that matters in life is the human connections that we have with it's all that matters. Nothing else matters. Everything else is just, we're LARPing. Everything else is just a fantasy we create. The only thing that's actually real, and this is my opinion, is the connections we have with the humans around us. Everything else is a fantasy. It's an illusion. We're just LARPing.
Aaron, it really has been a pleasure having you on. I want to wrap up with the last question, which is a book recommendation. If you've seen the show and seen the episodes, we always end with asking our guest for a book recommendation for our listeners and for our viewers. So tell us about a book, one, and you can name more than one book if you like, but one that has truly resonated with you and one that you always go back as a staple.
We were talking about this earlier, which is there's a book called Master Switch by Tim Wu, and I forget the full length of it, but the full title. It's been a while since I've read it, probably, almost maybe 10 years. But the whole premise of it is the fragmentation and consolidation of information empires throughout recorded history. So he takes a look at everything from like the telegraph to radio to Hollywood to the internet to how markets will begin highly fragmented and then become highly concentrated with a few players. So it is both a cautionary story and also a hopeful one, because there will always be a technology that disrupts the centralized one. At least I hope so. Like, I mean, unless AI is the end all be all, and then it's just like one master corporation that runs us all.
Aaron, it really has been a pleasure. Honestly, I've really enjoyed this one. I feel like there has been so many important topics, but the main one, I guess, if I was to summarize this, is it's trust. This is all about trust. And I really appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you so much, Ross. Thanks for having me. And maybe if we do a part two, let's do it in person.
100%. We'll definitely do that. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. This podcast is powered by Harrison Clark. For more episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind.